Hey everybody. I see that we've got about 12 people on the live stream. If you guys want to chime in and tell us like where you're coming from, potentially like what industry you work in. Ultimately, like this stuff all kind of plays into making sure that we're speaking to you in a way that makes sense, the way that matters. I think we're all in this together. And if you're comfortable with sharing, I'd love to know what brings you here. During the conversation, if there's anything or any questions that you guys might have, feel free to add them in, and we will make sure to get to as many questions as possible at the end. Jennifer, hey, from Portland, Oregon, New Jersey. Okay, cool. Yeah, keep going. So I'm in Los Angeles, you guys. Elizabeth,
I'm in
where
the
are you
Bay
right now?
Area, so I'm in just north of San Francisco. So for anybody that's out in the Bay, I live in San Anselmo.
I am based in Seattle, actually just a little outside Seattle in Bellevue. And amazingly, it's bright and sunny today. Fitting for our
Congratulations.
talk. Yes, thank you.
It's good for the good lighting. Oh yeah, so we've Chicago, marketing communications, Toronto, again Chicago. I appreciate the Chicago check-ins. I am
Also
originally from Chicago
originally
as
from
well.
Chicago, so well, I should say suburbs of
I didn't know
Chicago. You
this.
have to be careful, right? Like can't claim the city status.
That's true.
Which one specifically? Because I grew
Okay,
up
yeah,
in
I grew up
Libertyville.
in Northfield, which is like right by Glenview, Northbrook, that area.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Oh, small world. I love it. Perfect. Okay, so let's get started. I'd like to start this conversation off with a joke. So, a chief HR officer, so a behavioral scientist, and a podcaster walk into a bar. The bartender looks up and says, "Let me guess, you're here to debate whether career uncertainty is a psychological phenomenon or a corporate inevitability, or just really great podcast content." The HR officer sighs, "I just came here for a drink before another round of layoffs." The behavioral scientist scribbles notes, "Fascinating. So, avoidance behavior and uncertainty correlate." The podcaster grins, "Perfect. Let's call this episode Thriving in Doubt and Career Uncertainty," which brings us here to today. I have two amazing guests with me. Sonia is the former Human Resources Officer at the Gates Foundation, current Chief Strategy Officer at Brighter, brings a wealth of leadership experience in organizational strategy and impact-driven initiatives. Elizabeth Weingarten, journalist, applied behavioral scientist, and author of the new book, How to Fall in Love with Questions. Congratulations. A New Way to Thrive in Times of Uncertainty. And I'm Jackie Domanus, founder of Idea Citizen. Started LinkedIn group back in 2008, and it's bloomed into deeper conversations here online. We're doing lives a couple weeks. We actually have a summit coming up, so love to invite everybody to join me there. I guess Sonia, Elizabeth, do you have anything to add?
yeah, I'm happy to add a little bit more about my background. So, as you mentioned, have really spent my career at the intersection of science and storytelling, doing journalism and applied research everywhere from traditional media outlets like The Atlantic to the think tank New America to the applied behavioral science firm Ideas 42, and now in the tech world. But probably the best way to get to know me even a little bit more is just by sharing a few of the questions that have motivated me throughout my career. So, why do we humans do the strange things that we do? How can we change our behavior to benefit ourselves and those around us? And how, through a deeper understanding of our psychology, can we all live happier and more meaningful lives? So I know we'll be talking about many of those things today.
I am most recently a chief human resources officer. I've worked across a lot of sectors, Wall Street, global health to philanthropy. But what I've realized, I kind of stumbled into HR after a career in finance and actually a bit of creative writing. And what I've realized at the heart of every role, where I finally found my purpose, was this intersection of people, purpose, and performance. Right now, I'm working on building a wellness company focused on nutritional psychiatry and writing a book about how women reclaim their voices after years of being told they're too much or not enough. And I think ultimately, I believe that you lead by understanding systems and caring about people. And I think all leaders should do that. And so, particularly as we start talking about how do we thrive in uncertainty, I think both what Elizabeth said and hopefully what I've said will resonate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I realize I started off this conversation with a joke, but let's be honest, like there's nothing really funny about any of this. I think it's really stressful. I think a lot of us are in the thick of it together, and it feels quite uncomfortable. It's, I don't know, unnerving. So like, I mean, maybe Elizabeth, could you kick us off? Like, how did we even get here?
Yeah, well, I think to pick up on that, yes, uncertainty of all kinds is just so hard for us to deal with. And the reason for that is that as humans, we're actually biologically wired to want to reduce uncertainty in our environments. And that's partly because at any moment we're trying to use as little energy as we possibly can. This was, if you think about it, it was a smart adaptation when food was really scarce. But today, what we see is that navigating uncertainty forces us to use more metabolic energy, which means we feel this very powerful drive to resolve it, to conserve future energy. And that's what's known as selfish brain theory. So really your brain, your body is just trying to hold on to as much energy as it can. Uncertainty uses more of that energy, which means we want to reduce it. What we find too is that not everyone feels the same level of discomfort with uncertainty, and that people feel different levels of comfort or discomfort across contexts and situations. So that can get a little confusing, right? Because in some cases, feeling uncertainty when you're watching a Netflix show and wanting to know kind of like what's the next thing that's going to happen, that can be a fun uncertainty, or like a book, you're not sure what's going to happen next. But the uncertainty that you feel if you've been laid off, or if you are in a context where you're not really sure what's going to happen next in your career, that's really hard. And that can feel really, really stressful and even scary, right? One other thing to kind of note about, this experience that so many of us share is that there's something called the need for cognitive closure. And this is a concept that was coined by the psychologist Ari Kruglansky in the 1990s. And along with other researchers, he created this scale to help people measure how strong this need for cognitive closure is in them. And another way of describing that is how quickly do you tend to want answers in uncertain contexts, and how comfortable are you in the space of ambiguity and not knowing. And part of what influences this is our personality, particularly our levels of kind of openness to new ideas and experiences. In other cases, it can be influenced by our upbringing, whether or not we experienced trauma as children. And trauma can really warp our sense of safety and security, creating, an illusion of threats and uncertainty when they don't always exist. Really, at the end of the day, it's the difference between seeing the future as hopeless and threatening, or full of potential, or something in between. So I think the good news, as I've been describing, there is this kind of biological wiring that a lot of us have that makes it really uncomfortable to be in uncertainty. But the good news is that there are ways that we can move through it more intentionally. And something that I know we'll get to a little bit later, and something that I write about in the book, are just kind of the tools that we can use to, rather than feeling unstuck, or that's rather than feeling stuck in uncertainty and like we have to have all the answers to move forward. There are actually kind of strategies that we can use to feel, to get unstuck and to be able to move forward in these types of situations.
I'm always envious of those people that they're like, okay, it's potentially there will be a potential layoff, or like maybe for whatever reason, like the organization that they're with shutters, and they're like, oh, it'll be fine, something will come. And I'm like, how do you do that? I'm like, I have so much respect for people that just have that type of resilience. I mean, Sonia, you've seen it like at, very much at the highest of high levels at the corporate level. So like, I'd love to know what you're seeing, or like if there's been any transitions or progressions over time. Like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think, in addition to what Elizabeth said, we've got a structural issue in that, one, for the past few years, obviously, we all know that we have seen some seismic changes between the pandemic, work from home. As the younger generations come into the workforce, their expectations of an organization being a part of the world, being a part of the community, using their voice, obviously AI. But I also think that this has impacted the comfort of leaders. We are seeing record numbers of CEOs. I think Forbes came out with something earlier this year. 1,200 CEOs have left their roles over the past year. We've increasingly seen women dropping out of the workforce for things that we understand, like in the United States, not great policies around parental leave, childcare. We still have a discrepancy in pay, but also because there's a desire to be more part of the community. There's an entrepreneurial drive, a desire to be more aligned with the values. And that old promise of, hey, I work hard for you, I'm loyal to you, I focus on you, you'll take care of me. that contract was broken a long time ago. And when I'm built for loyalty. That is just one of my top traits. It's what I look for in my friends and partners. And I remember my very first job in investment banking. In the middle of the day, somebody was escorted out with 2 security guards.
Oof.
Now, that's not unusual when you're in finance, because if once you're laid off, they're afraid of the access that you have on your computer. But I could not figure out, what did he do wrong? And why did it have to be in the middle of the day? Why couldn't it have been like on a Friday? And he didn't do anything wrong, I found out. We had a bad quarter, and a bad quarter led to layoffs, and it was just his turn, I guess. And obviously, it still strikes me. I still see that image so vividly that without having the words for it, I realized me having loyalty to a company who does not have the loyalty back to me in return, it didn't feel natural to me, but it felt much more real than thinking, oh, I could work somewhere for 17 years. And nothing, that they'll always trust and respect me. And so the fundamental trust between organizations and employees has been broken. You can have loyalty to people, to your direct report, to your manager, to your colleagues, but at the end of the day, that sense of safety isn't there. And so whether you've been in a job for 5 years, whether you've just been laid off, whether you just started, we have this sort of existential sense of don't know what I need to do to make sure that I stay secure. And I think we'll start talking about this more. All I can tell people is it's not you. We have built this uncertainty into the structure of how we run our economy.
It's funny because how the contract has been broken. I had a former colleague, and I remember this was like 10, 15 years ago or so, but she was telling me about her father. At that point, he had already passed, but there was some sort of class action lawsuit or whatever. He worked for Monsanto. And it was one of his, like, I think some lawsuit had started before he had passed, but he made a point. He's like, no, he's like, I don't want to sue them. He's like, it gave me a wonderful career and pension, blah, blah. And it's like, let's be honest. It's like, there's a lot of, I'm not saying it's wrong or right. It's probably, there's a lot of villainization of Monsanto and things. And I'm like, I don't know the full scope of it. I'm probably on the same side of like villainize them. But this person felt so loyal to their organization that they're like, nope, I don't want to participate. I'm good. Like, that's not right for me. I'm good with going on with my life, which I thought is just really interesting because it's very much of a reflection of like generationally what was happening potentially as the employer and employer, how it was very different. And then even today, I mean, hey, you guys, we're doing this on LinkedIn. There's a lot of motivation content. I see it in the back end. I have, Idea Citizen LinkedIn group. It's like I scroll post over post, and it's like there's 2 things that I find oftentimes. It's one, it's about leadership. People like talking about that. Great. It's a good topic. Second is the motivation part of it. But it's like, to some degree, it comes off as a little bit like, I don't know, I get a little bit of from like the toxic positivity. It's like, it's everywhere. And it's like, can we cool it a little bit? Like, we're not idiots. We're not going into this blindly. So like how do you authentically in your day-to-day life, without just posting a stupid meme and everything, how do you actually live your life that you can kind of operate within this place of uncertainty?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question. And I also find that, one of the things that I saw again and again in my own, so a big part of my book is my own kind of journey to really figure out how to live better in uncertainty. Because I was carrying really, really heavy questions at the start of the book about, frankly, questions about my relationship. I was really struggling in my marriage, and questions about my career. I had recently left a job to pursue a creative project, and it was failing. And so I kind of had this, on the one hand, feeling like my relationship was failing. On the other hand, I had no idea what I was doing with my life. And I embarked on this journey to figure out, how do you start to have a different relationship with these, massive questions in your life? A big part of that was kind of feeling like the advice that was out there really just wasn't resonating with me. So one of the things I think we see a lot, and to kind of speaking to that toxic positivity, is this advice to just embrace uncertainty. And I just feel like, sure, maybe embracing uncertainty works for some people in some contexts. For me, it always felt really tone deaf, because I think it feels like, you're forcing yourself to feel a certain way about an experience that is going to be can be really challenging. And I'll just share something that is really central to the book that has helped me in terms of kind of living my day-to-day life differently with uncertainty. So as I mentioned, I was buckling under these heavy questions about my marriage and my career. And it was around that time that I actually found a book called Letters to a Young Poet. And I'm curious, and maybe folks can share in the chat if they've read Letters to a Young Poet before. But the book is a book of correspondence between the Austrian poet Rainier Maria Rilke and a 19-year-old aspiring poet whose name is Franz Capus, and it's from the early 20th century. And it's a book that, lest you think it's just some really random book, it actually counts people like Lady Gaga, Dustin Hoffman, and Marilyn Monroe among its fans. And Lady Gaga even has a line from it tattooed on her. So it made that much of an impact. The whole book is beautiful, but I was struck by one part of it. And in part of it, Capus, this aspiring poet, is asking Rilke for all kinds of advice, not only about how to become a poet, but really about how to live his life. And Rilke very famously responds to him not with answers, but by telling him to, quote, love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign tongue. And so, my book is really all about how to love the questions, what that means, and how it is a fundamentally different strategy than embracing uncertainty. And here it helps to know a little bit more, too, about Rilke's take on love. In another letter, he actually writes to Capus that for one being to love another human being, that's perhaps the most difficult task that has been entrusted to us. The ultimate task, the final test and proof, the work for which all other work is merely preparation. And so to me, what that says is that, just like sustaining a committed relationship can be both painful and really rewarding, this idea of loving the questions acknowledges that when we're in a relationship with uncertainty, it's going to be evolving. It's going to be frustrating, delightful, stultifying, freeing, like all of the things, right, that you can expect in a committed long-term relationship. And so for me, kind of in terms of how I'm living my life day to day, it's been really helpful to let go of that kind of toxic positivity, the kind of toxic mantras that we hear of just like, you just have to embrace uncertainty. It's so great. Well, it's okay if it doesn't feel great all the time. It's not going to. That doesn't mean that we also can't find possibilities in it, right? And so I think it's a both and situation where you can acknowledge that your relationship with uncertainty is going to be as complicated as your relationship with somebody who you love, right? A close partner. And just like that relationship is both kind of rewarding and challenging and exciting and terrible all at once, sometimes uncertainty can be that way too. And so I think kind of holding that has been helpful to me. But, and of course, we'll talk more too about some of the specific strategies for how to kind of move from that mindset shift, right, into kind of a day-to-day. One of the things that I talk about in my book that we can talk about a little bit later on is how to develop a questions practice. So.
And I feel like I've been kind of experiencing kind of a bit uncertainty, and that's probably been part of like me like reinvesting, if anything, into Idea Citizen. But it's been like there's kind of a few things that make uncertainty feel a little bit easier. It's one, and I'm sure like the community part of it, it's like, having my husband and everything like that helps. Like you're not in it alone. Like I think that's a really big part of it. And let's not also gloss over, it's like having a little bit of money to hold you over. And it takes a while to get there. I think that's a really hard thing to do very early in your career. And it's like, I remember being in various different situations where it's like, oh my God, like you're going to end up on the street or something. And the reality is like, there's not really any scenario because of, family and everything that would ever realistically happen. But your head goes somewhere like totally insane. But like that could also be the reality for some people. So part of this too is I think acknowledging different people's experiences, like they are all not uniform. It does not look the same for everybody, whether it be, place in life, stage of career, whatnot, like all of these things.
There are a couple different ways I was thinking about this. One is, which I can talk about in a bit, but I think there is a way that leaders can respond if we're talking about within a corporate environment. They often don't, that plays between sort of false certainty and sort of radical transparency. I also, if we're talking about individuals, when I'm working with individuals who are going through transitions, and I have a lot, part of when we talk about a career transition, whether it's yourself going through some doubts as to whether or not this is the right thing for you. You start seeing things happening around you that is making you uncomfortable, or you yourself has been impacted and it wasn't perhaps your choice. And that is inevitable in many circumstances. We've, since January 2025, just speaking of layoffs alone, 1,200 organizations in the US have gone through significant layoffs, impacting from a low in January of 20,000 employees to March, which is 140,000. And that's just layoffs. That's not even, considering everything else. So we kind of I kind of walk people through, in a way, it's not, I don't want to take anything away from what Elizabeth said. She's written a whole book about it, which is going to be amazing. But as I walk people through navigating that sort of uncertainty, particularly taking that moment as not the false positivity of like, oh, yay, a new opportunity, but it's the crisis moment that forces us to do things that we don't do when we're comfortable, but maybe we should, which is one, it's sort of a 5-step path, and there's some questions next to it, and we can put this in show notes afterwards, but approaching it with clarity and curiosity. What am I now curious about? Or what kind of problems do I actually want to spend my days solving? Move to truth telling. What am I pretending not to know? What fear is shaping my current decision? There's a couple more questions. Then it's just direction finding. Like, if I think through my career, what's the through line of things that I've enjoyed, whatever the job is? You don't have to do anything with it yet, but just begin to understand where do I thrive and what do I tolerate? Then it's fun. Then you go into reinvention and imagination of like, if I could do anything and barriers weren't an issue, what would that be? What if this was a detour and not a doorway? Like, what if this is not a detour, but a doorway? And then finally, action and alignment, which is, what is one small thing that I could do this week to lean into this potential future? Or who do I need? I'm becoming something. What is that? And how do I lean into what I'm becoming in small, short ways? What that does is not only kind of give people a bit of a structure, it also begins to reframe, this isn't just happening to me. I have some agency here that now can go deep into myself and say, who am I today that I wasn't 5 years ago? Who do I think I'll be in 5 years? And move into that future direction. And we can talk later about where I think leaders can do a better job in supporting their teams. But I do think at the end of the day, if anybody feels left behind, they shouldn't, because nobody has a roadmap right now. All we have is understanding of who we are and who we're becoming, and trusting that inner wisdom to guide us on the right path.
Sonia, if you could actually, I am curious about the whole leadership part of it, because I think we've all been in situations where you're in an organization, they're like, yeah, everything's great, great, great. And then the next week there's a layoff. You're like, what? And it's wild. Like, you can feel it. You can feel something, because people are really bad at lying generally. Somebody can say something to your face. The words can come out of their mouth that everything's fine, no problem, blah, 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 this and that. But you can feel it. I don't think I'm the only one. There's something that changes. There's a distance that plays. So it's like, you mentioned how the leadership role of it, but it's like, things happen. Uncertainty is just like a part of the game. I guess what I'm trying to ask you is like, what is leadership's role in like how much to give up? They're kind of stuck in this challenging place where it's like both things, where I'm an agent of the company and I also have people that I feel accountable to and supporting their professional growth as well as well-being. So like, where should the barometer lie for some of these things?
Well, first of all, you hit the nail on the head, Jackie, in that I think decades of research, if we didn't already know this, that when we really get to the root issue of dissatisfaction in organizations, every engagement survey, we ask about pay and training and jobs and happiness. But what really at a root of a lot of problems is that there is a gap between who we say we are and the actual experience that employees are having. And so if we say we're all about innovation, Okay, fine. But actually, the way you run the organization is 5 meetings for every meeting. Everything has to be done in PowerPoint because, we can't just talk to each other. Everything has to run through multiple layers and channels to be approved. And you're
Yeah.
like, that, well, how?
The
That's management.
pre-checks before actually presenting it.
Yeah, the pre-checks and then the pre-checks and then the pre-checks. And you're like, okay, where's innovation in here? That frustrates people. And so the biggest mistake that I see leaders making, particularly during disruptive moments, and I get it because you've got your lawyer on this side saying you can't say this, you've got your finance person, you've got your boss over here, you've got all these people looking at you. But at the end of the day, these are where true leaders are born, where you say, am I performing confidence or am I practicing clarity and care? There is a fine line. It's not binary, but you really need to be focused more on clarity and care because people know the difference. Like you said, they can read it. Well, just one quick story. I had moved across the country to join a company in Los Angeles, actually, Jackie, where we first met. And a month later, we were bought by people who turned out to be, frankly, crooks, right? And so it was terrible. I ended up staying for a few years, but it wasn't the company I joined. A good guy was hired to be CEO, and he came on the call. He didn't have a lot of time to prepare. He had like a day. And he said, listen, my name is Tim. I don't know what's going on exactly, but here's what I do know. I know this. I don't know this. Here's what I know is changing, and here's what I know is never going to change. Here is the process by how I'm going to figure out what comes next. Here's who I'm going to talk to in this time frame, and I'll keep you updated along the way. You could just feel the relief in the room. It would be insane for us. We would have loved answers, but we knew that he could not come on a call 24 hours later and say, here's everything. But he told us what's changing, what's not changing, and his path and timeline for coming to some conclusions. It was amazing. And that is what I think leaders who don't practice that type of clarity, as opposed to say, everything's great, we got it in hand, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
Breaks trust.
I just want to underscore what an essential skill it is for leaders, but really for all of us to normalize saying, I don't know. And which is it's so absolutely hard. It's so much easier said than done. Because we all face pressure to know things, right, in our job. But the clarity and care, I love how you articulated that, Sonia, that comes with that, is so, because if you're sharing that you don't know in that kind of clear and caring way, and you're also, open to kind of the roadmap for how you might find answers and how you might know, it's just makes such a huge difference. And I also think about this in the context of, if anybody has ever been, I'm sure we all have, in a situation where your flight's being delayed. It is so much worse to not hear anything than to just hear them on the loudspeaker saying, hey, we still don't know what's going on. We're just keeping you posted. At least you have somebody being clear and communicative, right? Versus the radio silence or the kind of false certainty that ends up not being the case.
Absolutely, because you're like, and I just want to make sure you
yes.
didn't forget about
yes,
me. Please.
Exactly.
Thank you. I still exist. I'm sitting in the hangar. Thanks.
Something I actually wrote about this recently for my Substack, but I had a chance to talk to some physicians who work explicitly on this challenge of how do you help doctors become more comfortable in uncertainty? Because so often when you're a physician, you have somebody that's kind of demanding answers, right? You want to know what's wrong with me and what do I need to do? And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes the doctor doesn't know the answer to that question. And ultimately, I spoke to one physician who said that often in those moments, what he really tries to focus on is just being there and being present with the other person, asking them questions, trying to help them feel heard and seen and understood, right? And I think, Sonia, to the point that you're making, I think that is a part of care in those moments, to not necessarily feel like I have to know the answers, but how do I better understand what the person or the people in front of me are experiencing right now, and really kind of be there and kind of witness and accompany, that group of people.
I think it's such an important point, and everyone on this call, and I can't wait to hear your questions and thoughts as we get to that point, but everyone on this call impacts other people. And I obviously, in my role in HR, sort of focused on leaders and their impact on their direct reports or employees. But that sometimes creates waiting for someone else to do something for me so I get more comfortable. And sometimes we forget, but we also impact other people.
Yes.
Whatever job that you're in, whatever role you're in, obviously in your life, family, and community, there's a lot. You have a lot of influence. But sometimes, I've seen people who maybe say like in a mid-career position, and they're so annoyed with their managers upwards, but don't quite realize that the people around them or the people who are maybe lower in the hierarchy are looking to them and saying, wait, are you going to respond to me? Am I going to hear back from you about the thing that you're holding for me? And as you said, Elizabeth, when we get really busy, we get really inward. We start focusing on ourselves and saying just one foot in front of the other to get through it. It's really hard to look up and to say, but what impact am I maybe having on other people? And is maybe stepping out of myself and doing one thing for someone else can be really helpful for my own sort of mental sort of health and sense of control and power. And so that we're not perpetuating the issue that we're waiting for someone to help us. Are we doing it for anyone else?
And I think this gets to a big part of the kind of challenge and also the way out of this, what makes uncertainty so hard too, which is this tendency I think we all have to narrow, right? In times of uncertainty because it's scary, it's stressful, it doesn't feel, it feels like, when we're feeling insecure, we tend to want to cling to the things that we know and things that are going to make us feel safe, even if that's a story that we're telling ourselves, right? That is actually harmful or that's not helping us move to the next place, even if it's kind of a negative story. But I think, Sonia, to your point, and what we can talk about a little bit later too, is there's tremendous kind of possibility when you're able to, in these times of uncertainty, whether you're a leader, whether you're somebody kind of who's going through it on the job seeking side, to really kind of look up and think about, what are the areas that I can kind of get curious about right now, and how might I be able to invite different questions and different possibilities into this moment. And I'll just share a quick story too, because I think one of the things that impacted me most when I was doing the research and reporting for this book was I talked to a lot of people who are experiencing and have for their whole lives experienced extreme levels of uncertainty every day. And so we're talking about people who, undocumented immigrants, we're talking about folks who are living with disabilities. And so I spoke to a woman who, her name was Barbara Schoen. She experienced in her early 30s, she was in a car accident and was paralyzed from the waist down. And before this car accident, she had been working in a corporate job. She had been kind of climbing the ladder, feeling, like a sense of, she was really ambitious and she felt excited about her job, but she also always felt like there was something more for her. And she had grown up in a working class family. She had gotten really lucky in that she was able to get her first job out of high school. They paid for her college degree. And she knew that she had been really lucky. And she always knew that she wanted to give back to people who had grown up kind of in a similar circumstance and may not have had the educational opportunities that she did. So she's working in this corporate job. She kind of has this thing in the back of her head, like, I'd like to do that someday. I don't have time right now. I'll get to it. Has this, transformative experience, right? Which I think many of us could look at that and say, what do you do in that situation? How do you move on from that? What does that look like? And to this question, Sonia, that you were posing, who am I? Who am I becoming? Right? Those were these big questions that she was carrying. But what I was so struck by when I talked to her is that moment that after the accident and in the years after, the experience that she had and what she found in that moment was, in her words, freedom. Why she found freedom is because she realized that she had been really tightly gripping to this sense of who she was, right? Her identity was this job, right? She was really wrapped up in, this is the career path that I'm in, this is what I'm following. And this experience of extreme uncertainty, this kind of massive change in her life broke that. It broke that relationship to this old identity. And it allowed her to really rethink who she wanted to be in this moment. She really changed her life in that way. She went on to get a PhD, and to now a lot of the work that she does is trying to empower folks with disabilities to live independent lives, helping people get the resources that they need. So I just share that because to me, I always think back to her story when I'm feeling stuck, right, in a sense of uncertainty or feel myself narrowing in fear, which is very real, right? But that it can be scary. and it can be this time of breaking from maybe some of those old patterns or identities that are no longer serving you.
Let's hope it doesn't take, because I imagine a majority of people aren't going to be going through something
But
like
a
that,
layoff, no,
God willing.
all
But
these
it's like,
things in life
but
that are shocking to us, right? That are really hard. No, it doesn't
yes.
obviously have to be so dramatic, but yeah.
No, but yeah, but like it just highlights any of these situations highlight like just how little control any of us actually have over anything. I know that you both took some time to really think about practical tools too, and I guess just for everybody listening, one of the things I really try to have these conversations not only from like a aspirational standpoint, but tactically. So
you can really think of a questions practice just like you would think of a meditation practice or a yoga practice. It's really just a time to explore and commit to some of the big questions that are guiding your life. And I actually think that some of the questions that Sonia posed earlier are great ones to start with. And in the book, I lay out different prompts and kind of a questions map that people can follow. And the idea is you start with a question or a couple of questions that are really kind of top of mind for you, something that you're feeling uncertain about, maybe a little anxious about. And the map and the prompts are really designed to help you not necessarily get the answers, but to get clarity. And so that's kind of the journey that you go on. And I'll kind of describe, there are 4 basic elements of the questions practice. Again, a lot of resonance, I think, with what you were sharing, Sonia. So I was excited to hear that. But the first kind of component of a questions practice that's really essential is curiosity. It's really grounded in that mindset of curiosity. So what that means is relating to the uncertainty in your life when you can, with more curiosity than fear. And what we find is that by approaching uncertainty with curiosity, of course, you start asking questions, but there's also research to suggest that that can also reduce the anxiety and kind of the discomfort that you feel too. So it's actually, really supportive in that way. And it also, the more you're asking questions, the more you're seeing your experience and kind of your reality more clearly, and not just through a lens of, everything is terrible and it's going to be terrible forever, right? Which I think is really easy to feel that way. And I certainly felt that way in moments and have felt that way in moments of my life when I've been really deeply insecure, uncertain and insecure. The second part of the practice is all about conversation. And really, questions, of course, can exist on their own, but more often they come in pairs or groups, and they're parts of conversations that we have with ourselves and that we have with other people. If we allow them to, these are, conversations that can really help guide us through uncertainty. And in the book, I also share lots of practices and ideas to help you have better conversations with yourself during times of uncertainty. And that often starts with using kind of questions that are answerable to help you feel more safe and secure in those moments. So you can start to be curious about some of those bigger questions, like these questions about kind of who am I and who am I becoming? So you might ask questions like, what am I noticing in my body right now? What are the facts I might not be looking at? I think similar to one of your questions that you were posing, Sonia, might kind of start to probe your emotions. And another thing that can really help in this context is imagining that you're giving advice to someone else. So that's, a tool that can help you get unstuck from those moments of feeling like you don't know what to do and you don't know kind of what the answers are, and those moments that are a little more fearful. Other third C and the third component of a questions practice is community. And this is really one of the most essential parts of being able to kind of thrive in uncertainty and stick with your questions. And part of that is community, of course, evolved to enhance our sense of security during uncertainty. And neuroscience research actually shows us that when we're connected in community, it reduces our cortisol, and it actually activates the part of our brain that indicates we're getting a reward and that we're safe. So finding the right community, finding the right kind of support during these moments, which of course is, and I think, did we lose Jackie?
We might have.
Well, I'll keep rolling with the questions practice. But
Keep rolling, 'cause I think we're
great.
still rolling.
She'll be back.
I'm sure she'll be back.
So community, essential element. And of course, something like this conversation, like Idea Citizen, these are all places where we can find community and we can all acknowledge maybe the similar questions that we're asking and going through together. And then the final part of a questions practice is commitment. And this is really essential. You need to kind of commit to the process of exploring questions while also observing which questions do we want to kind of no longer live with and love. And what I mean by that is I think there are times in our lives when we're carrying particular, hey, Jackie, when we're carrying particular questions that are really no longer serving us. And these are questions that maybe keep you stuck in patterns of regret and rumination. And so a really important part of it is recognizing when a question is not actually moving you forward. It's not helping you open your life up and the possibilities that you want to see, but actually kind of holding you back. And so the final thing that I'll say is kind of the first step of the questions map that I lay out in the book and the questions practice is really getting curious about the questions that you're holding at any given moment and asking yourself, are the questions that I'm asking binary questions? In other words, are they questions that only have a yes or no answer? Or are they questions that are actually kind of opening me up to a lot of different ideas, futures, possibilities in my life? And what I find is that sometimes when we're feeling really stuck and uncertain, it's often because the question that we're asking, either subconsciously or consciously, is a binary, right? Or it's a question that isn't actually opening us up and into different possibilities. So I'll pause there and we can dive in on any of that. But I know Sonia has thoughts to share too.
Well, and if anything, I'd like to, I realize I missed a little bit of that with some technical issues, but I think it's also, I like your point around continuing to check in on this, because I think that the questions that we ask and also the answers that we derive from that at any various different junctions of time
Yep.
are going to be very different. Like the questions that I'm asking myself today are very different than the ones that I asked, 10 years ago or even further back than that. So I know somebody that they actually had a practice of every 5 years, they were kind of like do a life strategy. And I'm like, oh, I kind of like this. And there's something to be said for like these questions and building out like, where do you want to go? Because you actually do have governance of where you choose to spend your time and how you choose to live your life. And I think one of the most crucial times too, like I hope there are also some, new grads or younger people listening to this conversation, but it's like, I think one of the most crucial and interesting times of life to actually ask some of these questions is after you've left kind of the confines of your parental home, because that's always a really interesting time too, where you're like, are these my thoughts or are these thoughts of somebody else? Of course, they're doing it in their best interest and everything, but like, are these my own thoughts? And do I, in fact, want to take these and continue with these in my future?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, thanks for reminding. It's a really good
Yeah,
reminder.
well, I'll just say one last thing there too, which is a big part of the book is about the importance of ritual in helping us deal with uncertainty. And a part of the questions practice is exactly that. It's like, how can we start to create rituals around kind of checking in with some of these questions? And to your point, because they do evolve, or you might decide, I don't like this question anymore. I want a new question. And here's the question that I actually want to ask. But in part of the book, I get into a framework for kind of different questions in our lives. One of the and I kind of liken it to parts of a fruit tree. And one of the types of questions is the heartwood. And the heartwood is a part of the tree that actually lends itself to kind of giving the tree stability and equilibrium. And it's the core of the tree. And it's actually it follows, it's a part of the tree throughout the tree's entire life. And so some of these questions are heartwood questions. They're questions that you'll have for your whole life and that will stay with you. And that's actually a really beautiful thing, right? They just kind of evolve and they're your companions.
Yeah, absolutely. Sonia, I know you've got like a good list as well that you think that I think that people should take advantage of.
Well, I certainly have things that I have used for myself, and I've advised others as they're going through their own uncertainty or transitions. One of them was the sort of 5-step process that I mentioned, tying in very nicely to Elizabeth's questions practice. I always recommend to people, I do it myself. I write myself a letter once a year. So it's New Year's Eve, and I open it up a year later on New Year's Day, because the days can change, but you don't know if you're changing. And so when you actually read your letter from yourself and say, Here's what I'm excited about. Here's what I'm scared about. Here's whatever is going on in your life. And you read that a year later and you're like, I really have changed and evolved. So I think it's fun to read about your past self. The second, when we're in, uncertainty, particularly in careers, we rush into action. We're like, okay, now it's happened. Get my LinkedIn, get my resume, get my connections going. And you should, but you should also make sure that you give yourself time. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Go for a walk in the woods if you have it, by the beach, on the road, wherever you are, outside, without your earbuds on. Listen to nature and don't have a to-do list in your mind. Something emerge in you. There's an inner wisdom that we never give a chance to talk to us because we're rushing, rushing, rushing. And so walking is forward motion. So it kind of creates like I'm walking into my future. I don't know what'll happen, but something will. You'll at least feel rejuvenated and refreshed. You'll feel a calm energy, but sometimes answers will come. The third is if someone's been laid off or they've been, let go and it wasn't their choice, I always recommend writing your own fake resignation letter. And in that resignation letter, write about the reasons that you are leaving and the opportunity you're moving towards. And that will help you, again, reclaim a little bit, even mentally, of some agency, but it'll also help you articulate for yourself, which is the most important person, is what have I been tolerating in this environment? And what do I actually believe I could thrive in? And then finally, just some advice on interviews. As you start getting ready for interviews, I'll tell you, if you're a hiring manager or if you've worked in HR, this might sound familiar. We don't really train hiring managers on how to do great interviews. Some are good, some are not good. But what a lot of mistakes that candidates make is thinking that a list of their accomplishments is enough. Here's the bridge of divide. I have a lot of experience and accomplishments. I don't care if you're 21 or 81. You do. You have a life's worth of great stuff. The hiring manager is stressed out because they're like, something is missing from their team. This is one meeting of 20 they have that day. They have in their mind what looks good. You're asking them, the hiring manager, to make that translation of your accomplishments to their job, what they need. Do it for them.
Yeah.
And the way that you do it for them is, that when you're reading about them or looking at the job description or talking to the screener, also ask those questions about the hiring manager and the team. What's that team known for in the organization? What is the hiring manager focusing on? What do kind of meetings look like? And then, because usually your question time with the hiring manager is at the end, so you kind of want to have some of this information before you get into the interview. But once you start understanding what keeps them up at night, and you can use your experience to begin problem solving your experience into their world. Don't let them be the ones to translate your accomplishments. Too many hiring managers look at things that they've already know. I know that company. I want that same job that they've done before. I want a certain pedigree or school. It's hard to overcome that if you're leaving it up to them. So bring your experience into solving their problems in the interview. That will go a really, really long way. So those are some tips.
No, that's excellent advice. I'm very much the audience also in this conversation. I'm like, oh yeah, I should like these are excellent ideas. And ultimately, like I love this. Like there's really like a clearly there's like the mental component of reclaiming uncertainty and kind of reassessing where you want. And then like I love it, like the combination of like the mind and the action and it's like both of these things are relevant. One of the things that we ended up kind of glossing over a little bit because I was a little bit nervous about time was about the power of community. So maybe like I'll take a look for some questions, but if maybe you guys could talk about like power community pertaining to like uncertainty and how that
actually shared a little bit about that. I think you may have hopped off. That was your technical challenges,
okay.
But community is one of the 4 C's of the questions practice that I laid out. So curiosity and conversation, community, and commitment being those 4. And community really above almost everything else was what I found throughout my research and reporting to be kind of the central, most important part of being able to thrive in uncertainty. And as I was mentioning, community is something that evolved to make us feel safe and secure. And so, you can see from neuroscience research that it drops our cortisol levels and just kind of makes us in general feel like we're safe, right? And we all know that intuitively, so it's not a surprise. But I do think, something that I found too is that community can come in all different forms, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to mean like, oh, I have to go out and find some new community. It can be your partner. It can be, kind of your immediate family. It can be a LinkedIn group, right? That you feel like you really have a lot of affinity for. Or it can be a group of friends, but just kind of finding that group of people where you feel like you can have space to express the uncertainty and the questions that you're experiencing. And then fundamentally, I think what Sonia said is really so key here, which is there's so much pressure to just take action, right? In these moments in transition, but how do you give it a little bit of space too? How do you actually kind of take a little bit of time, if you can, to reflect on some of these questions and to hold them for a little bit more time so that maybe you can actually kind of move forward in a way that really feels rooted in what you really want and what you really need out of the next step versus, I think sometimes, again, out of like fear and anxiety, it can be easy to just say like, oh, I just gotta do the next thing. I can't really think about this too much. But I think being supported by other people can often help you sit for a little bit longer in that kind of sometimes uncomfortable time of uncertainty.
Absolutely. I have one, I'd say, big question, but I know that I know some people are going to have to hop off. So everybody, whoever's on, please cross network with one another. That is what LinkedIn is here for, after all. Please go follow and connect with Sonia as well as Elizabeth and myself. I did put in the chat the link to Elizabeth's book. I put links to Sonia and Elizabeth's LinkedIn channels if you get to go check them out. And then also I have with LinkedIn Live, I have another one next week, and we have a summit coming up. So those links are also in the chat. I'm going to ask you a beefy question I feel like there's not really good response for, but it's like,
Love it.
well, okay. Like, do you guys think that like we have new administrations, different administrations? I feel like we're all kind of in this mode of like, what's going on? I don't know if this is ever really going to change, or if this is kind of what we should expect moving forward. So I guess I'd love, if either of you have a hypothesis as to, will this kind of change, or should we kind of expect to continue with some of this uncertainty?
I think that, yes, this administration does sort of thrive on chaos, but I think that the VUCA environment with the volatility, uncertainty, et cetera, it's here to stay. It's been here for 20 years. The pace of change that sort of, now I'm forgetting the name, but they have this sort of like algorithm of like the pace of technology change. It doubles like every 5 years.
Right.
And so we are definitely in an epoch defining moment. The printing press, the industrial revolution, the rise of personal computing. That's just one aspect of it. Obviously, we've got economies and nation borders, all water shortages. I mean, there's a lot happening, and unfortunately, we get to know it all the time because we're bombarded with information. And so it's our processing abilities are under attack at all times. And so what Elizabeth was saying about community, we're tribal biologically. We survive, these puny bodies with no fangs or claws survived all this time because we communicated with each other. So we hold on to each other. We accept without false positivity and toxic positivity. Uncertainty is here to stay, and it attacks our nervous system. We do have to acknowledge that. And so finding ways to move out of that threat mode and saying, this could be a moment of reinvention, of growth, of evolution, if I can move out of threat space, if I can have a community, and if I can do some reflection and lean into what I'm becoming and begin to let go of the things that are no longer serving me about myself. It can be liberating at the same time that it is also terrifying. It's two things that we will learn to hold as one, because that is the world that we live in.
Couldn't agree more. I'll just maybe finish with a quote from a book called The Wisdom of Insecurity, written in 1951 by Alan Watts. And the quote is, "There is then the feeling that we live in a time of unusual insecurity. In the past 100 years, so many long established traditions have broken down, traditions of family and social life, of government, of the economic order, and of religious belief." And he continues, "As a matter of fact, our age is no more insecure than any other. Poverty, disease, war, change, and death are nothing new. In the best of times, security has never been more than temporary and apparent." And so I share that because I think what Sonia is saying is right. We can only expect uncertainty because we've always only had uncertainty. And so I think it's easy to feel like this is an unusual moment. And in some ways, of course, it is, because all moments are unique in their own ways. But I think just, if that brings anybody any comfort, it brought me a little bit of comfort to kind of recognize that in so many different eras, we've had that sense. And that really the most important thing at the end of the day is focusing on what can we control in these environments and in these times when so much is outside of our control.
That's the perfect way to wrap this up. Ladies, you're the best guests. If you have absolutely anything you maybe want to share, pitch, or whatever, please do so.
I'll just say thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Thank you to everyone who joined. If you do want to connect, I'll speak for Elizabeth, but I think she would agree that please connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you've got any questions that didn't get answered, just reach out anytime.
Yes, so it was so fun to be here. And same goes for me. Please reach out and connect.
All right. Thanks. Have a great one. Bye-bye.